If you're in the process of learning the 𝘮𝘰 system and still haven't quite figured out how to use it to craft an epic guitar solo, that's exactly what I'm going to do for you in this lesson. And be sure to stick around till the very end of the lesson because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're going to love. First thing I'm going to do is play the solo for you, and then I'm going to teach it to you note for note, and then we're going to talk about exactly how we use the 𝘮𝘰 system to create this bad boy. All right, now let's break this solo down. The thing that I like about it is that it uses the 𝘮𝘰 system to focus on the chord changes. So in this solo, we're actually playing over chord changes instead of taking a singular approach to just picking a scale and then just using that one scale the whole time. So this solo is in the key of C, and the chords that we're playing over are a 1, 4, 5, right? It's a blues shuffle. So we got 3 chords, a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. The 1 chord being C, the 4 chord being F, and the 5 chord being G. And what we're doing here is we're playing this solo in one specific neighborhood on the fretboard. So what we're doing is and I'm gonna demonstrate this later on, but what we're doing is we're overlapping the 𝘮𝘰 system with those 3 chords, and then we're keeping it in this one area, right? With these particular shapes for C, for F, and for G. And we're just keeping it in there and just peppering in a couple extra notes, adding some color to it, and also, even throwing in some pentatonic-like runs so that it's an actual cohesive kind of solo instead of just, mechanically running through the chord shapes. Okay, so the very beginning of this solo focuses on the 1 chord, and the first lick is this. So what I'm doing here is starting with the first finger on the, the 8th fret on the G string. We're going to hammer on with our 2nd finger to the 9th fret, like that. And then with our 1st finger, we're going to bar the 8th fret here on the B and the high E strings, and we're going to play the B string 8th fret, and then high E string 8th fret, and then back to the 8th fret on the B string. So we're going like that. And then next, we're going to reach over to this note here, which if we're thinking in terms of like the C minor pentatonic scale, right, this note right here, in that scale, that flat 7 note, we're going to take that and we're going to bend it a whole step. So we're bending it from this note to the pitch of this note, which is also here, which is the root note, which is C, right? So this is one of those just like, you do it and you will never play a wrong note so long as you're playing the root note. So you do that whole step bend, right, just like that. Now this, again, like I said, we're outlining the 1 chord. So if we were to think in terms of 𝘮𝘰d, the 1 chord, which is C, right, in this particular shape, now if we're thinking in terms of 𝘮𝘰d, right, C.a.g.e.d, the E in 𝘮𝘰d represents this shape of the chord. So this is a C chord, but the actual shape is of an E chord, right? So if we were to think of the E chord coming down here, right, in the open position, right? I did a previous lesson on this, it was called If You're Over 40 and Don't Know 𝘮𝘰d. This is essentially kind of a part 2 to it as well. So definitely check out that lesson to get sort of a precursor, to what we're talking about here today. But just briefly, we'll talk about this. So the E chord, right, the E chord shape, we're thinking just in terms of the shape here. When we adapt it up here to the 1 chord, right, we're adapting it to C, but it's still the E chord shape, right? So we're focusing that shape and combining it with a little bit of pentatonic positioning, right? Right, and then next up, the 2nd line is pretty much the same, only we're gonna do something different with this note. We're gonna go. Right, so we're bending up, so we're doing the same thing with 8th fret hammer on to 9 on the G string, and then we're doing 8 on the B and high E strings and back. Right, B string, high E string, then B string again. And then we're gonna do that whole step bend, but we're gonna release it and bring it back down. And sustain that note, give it some vibrato if you want. Right, so it's just a slight variation of the first line. So both of them together are like this. Then. All All right, and then in the backing track, the chords move from C, the 1 chord, to F, the 4 chord. So the next line is going to go like this. Oop. There we go. So what's happening here is with our first finger, we're going to start on the 6th fret, slide up to 7 on the D string. All right. Now this note right here is kind of outside. It's kind of an outside note, but it's one of those things where when you slide in, just through that little half step slide in, kind of adds some color. Right? Just color to the overall tonality of it. And then our pinky, right, is going to reach over to the 10th fret of the D string and the G string. We're going to bar it, right, just for a brief second. Right, so we're barring the D and the G strings on the 10th fret with our pinky. And then we're doing that thing again where we're starting on the D string and then the G string and then back on the G string, or the D string, sorry. So it's kind of like when we're doing here. Right, same here, but right, just new position, new strings and everything. But that kind of cyclical thing, right, where we start and then end and start again. All right, and then once we do this, we're gonna catch with our first finger the 8th fret of the G string, right? And then with our 3rd finger, we're gonna catch the 10th fret of the G string. So we're doing this. And then from here, our first finger is gonna bar the B and the high E strings on the 8th fret. But what's happening is once we hit that, our 3rd finger is going to hammer onto the 10th fret of the B string while the 1st finger is still holding that bar because we want that high E string to continue to ring out. Right? But you're just hammering on the 10th fret of the B string. You're not doing this. Right? You're just hammering on the B string. So it's these two notes essentially that you're hearing. But it's just for a brief second because you release it and then bring it back to the 8th fret on the B and the high E string. And then with your 3rd finger, we're going to catch the 10th fret of the G string. And that concludes the run over the 4 chord. We're going. All right. So notice how we ventured out completely from the C shape as well as, I mean, for the most part, the minor pentatonic shape. But what we're doing is we're outlining the chord tones or the notes that make up the chord, right? Because if we're outlining chord tones in an F chord, we're going to be playing the right notes every single time. So we're going. So this essentially kind of it like works as like a play on this particular shape, which in c.a.g.e.d, this is the A shape, right? Because check this out. If I were to bring this down here to the open position, right? Or if we were to do the A chord like this or like this, however you like to play it, but that essential shape. Now, if we were to adapt it to its movable shape, it looks like this, or you can do it like this too, right? Personally, if you want to, I like to play it like this. If I'm trying to play every single note, including that high E string, which is easier to leave that open. But if you're doing this, it's easy for your 3rd finger to kind of mute that string. But then again, if you're just playing these notes, like in an A chord, right? You're still, you're getting the point across. So we're bringing that up here to this position. This is an F note here. So we've adapted the A chord shape to an F chord, okay? So you want to just separate the two. I know it might be a lot if you're new to this. Understand the difference between the chord shapes, right, and the actual tonality of the chord. So the whole thing about c.a.g.e.d is the C chord, A chord, G chord, E chord, and D chord are referenced as shapes, and it can be adapted to any key. And in this case, we're playing in the key of C. So we're adapting the chord shapes to that key, and when the chords change, right, when it goes from, let's say, a C chord to an F chord, right, we're adapting the c.a.g.e.d system accordingly. Now that F chord is an A chord shape, A as in c.a.g.e.d, A is in c.a.g.e.d, right? So that's how we're able to use it. And then with this, with that lick, we're essentially highlighting those chord tones. We're not just playing, right? We're not arpeggiating it because we don't need to, but we're making sure that the notes within that shape we're hitting, right? Right? So we're focusing on all those chords that are right on top of the actual, like the actual shape of it, right? So that's kind of a way that you can use c.a.g.e.d to create a great solo that doesn't sound like you're just arpeggiating the chords, because then you're kind of too on the nose, right? We want to make it like musical and you know, pass it off as like a cool solo instead of just like mechanically running through it. So that's that line. One more time. Then in the backing track, we come back to the 1 chord. So we're going to adapt accordingly. And the next line is this. All right. So what we're doing here is kind of a cool double stop thing. This solo has a lot of double stops. We're taking our first finger and we're going to be barring the 8th fret of the G and B string. And then we're going to hammer on with our second finger here just on the 9th fret of the G string. So we're making sure that this note is ringing out while we do this. So remember to just use the tip of your finger on your second finger to hammer onto the 9th fret of just the G string there. And then our first finger is going to hit the 8th fret of the B string, and then back to the 10th fret on the G string. And then we're going to do that double stop thing again, where we're barring the G and the B on the 8th fret, and then hammering on the 9 with our second finger. So the whole line, nice and slow, is like this. Okay, one more time. All right, see how that's happening here? And when we're doing this, we've come back to that 1 chord, right? The E chord shape over a C chord of the C chord, right? We're back at it, right? Highlighting those chord tones with this lick. And then from here, with our third finger, we're going to bar the 10th fret on the D and the A strings for a quick second. We're going to play 10th fret on D, and then 10th fret on A. And then our first finger is going to play the 8th fret on A, and then we bring it down to the 7th fret. And we hold it there. Now that right there, this note that we're ending on, it's a chord tone for C. It's the major third, which is also here. Remember how we do, right? So we're just playing a lower octave of that same chord tone, right? So we're focusing on that instead of just, again, just pentatonic wailing and focusing on the root notes, right? So that lick one more time. Right, so I'll just kind of show you what we have so far with the solo and see if you can kind of hear the chord changes happening without the backing track, right? And by the way, if you're enjoying this lesson, please support the channel by hitting that like button and consider being a subscriber. So that way we can bring you way more lessons just like this one. So that first lick we have. So even though without the backing track, the backing track's not there, you can hear there's like implications that there's chord changes going on. And the only reason for that is because we're focusing on, targeting those chord tones, and the cage system is what allows us to do that. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. We're gonna go over the lick that covers the 5 chord, which is G, and it emphasizes this particular shape, right, of G, which is the 5 chord, right? And this shape is a C chord shape, right? I know it normally looks like this when we're playing it in the open position, but if we were to adapt it to its movable shape, it's the same chord, right? Just a different configuration of our fingers, and we bring it up, we're adapting it, right, to the tonality of G. So taking the C chord shape, but it's a G chord. Remember, separate the two. Separate the chord shape from the actual chord, right? So that's why, right, we're again, when we're focusing on the 1 chord is the E chord shape, 4 chord is the A chord shape, and the 5 chord is the C chord shape. All within caged. So the lick goes like this. That's that lick that, and this is kind of a play on arpeggiating the actual chord, right? I love playing that lick over a 5 chord. It just sounds great. Kind of reminds me of like, songs from like the 80s and stuff. They do licks like that. Once we've concluded the previous lick, so we're hanging on the first finger, we're hanging with our first finger on the 7th fret, then we reach over with our pinky to the 10th fret, then and that's on the A string, and then our third finger is gonna hit the 9th fret of the D string, then our first finger is gonna hit the 7th fret on G, and then our second finger is gonna hit the 8th fret on B. All right. Straight up arpeggio. It's essentially taking this chord shape and just breaking up the notes. Oop. Right? But we're not doing the whole chord. We're doing just these notes. Then we reach over with our third finger to the 10th fret of the B string, and we give it a whole step bend and release. All right, so we're bending from this note, like to that pitch, and then we bring it down. And then first finger is going to grab the 8th fret of the B string, and then third finger is grabbing the 10th fret of the G string. Like that, so we're going. And that right there works perfectly over that 5 chord. And then we're gonna play the next lick that's gonna help us smoothly transition back to the 1 chord. And it goes like this. Right? So once we do this, we're gonna do another double stop. First finger is gonna be on the 8th fret of the B and the high E strings, and then our third finger is gonna hammer onto the 10th fret of just the B string. All right, and then coming back to the that double stop. Double stop meaning we're playing 2 notes at once. All right, and then our third finger is gonna reach over to the 10th fret of the G string. And then we go back to a very familiar lick that we did earlier, where we're double stopping on the 8th fret of the G and the B string. Then hammering on with our second finger to just the 9th fret of the G string. All right, then 8th fret on the B string, and then 10th fret on G. Then double stop again, hammer on. So in context, we have. All right, so picking that up from that lick over the 5 chord. Right, and we're almost done. Then we play the 10th fret of the D string, and then the 8th fret, and then the 10th fret on the A string, and then I'm ending it with playing this, you know, this very bluesy move, flat 7 note, where I'm just sliding down from the 10th fret of the D string down to the, or even the 9th fret, doesn't really matter, you're just sliding down to the 8th fret of the D string. And you're holding that, right? That flat 7 gives it that bluesy sound. Right, and that slide is just a nice little embellishment, you know, so you don't even have to do that if you don't want to. You can just go, just hold it, or you can just give it some pizzazz. All right. So now that we've broken it down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play through the solo again without the backing track, but the whole thing. And I want to see if you can hear the chord changes happening, right? Now, could you hear the chords moving as I was playing through that solo without the backing track, right? Now I'm going to throw on the backing track, and you'll be able to hear just right on the nose as those chords actually change, just for further reference, right? You'll be able to hear those chord tones, right, as the chords are being played underneath, so that way you can really kind of hear what I'm talking about when we're playing over these chord changes. Okay, so hopefully there you could clearly hear what was going on with those chord changes and how each of those licks adapted to them, right? So that way we're able to play an epic guitar solo using the C.a.g.E.D system to give us a roadmap to targeting those chord tones, so that way we can really add some interesting flavor to our solos without just taking that linear approach, picking one scale and just sticking to it. So the last thing I'm going to do, just to really drive this point home, is to show you how the C.a.g.E.D system led up to those particular chord shapes that we use for this solo. So like I said, we just stuck to one neighborhood on the fretboard. In that previous C.a.g.E.D lesson that I did, I talked about how you can kind of take the C.a.g.E.D system, because it covers the whole fretboard, you know, so taking it chunk by chunk, and finding whatever chord progression you're working with, finding where you can reach those chord tones for over those changes in just one chunk at a time. So it's not like you have to like solo over the 1 chord here, then you got to go here for the 4 chord and here for the 5 chord, right? You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can do it all in just one little chunk at a time. So let me tell you how I discovered this particular chunk with these chords. So starting with the 1 chord, C, right? We obviously know in the open position we have C right here. And C happens to be the first letter in 𝘥. So we have C. The next thing we're going to do is find C in the A chord shape, right? C, A. So here it is. Right? And then what's after A in 𝘥? G, right? So we find the C chord using the G shape. So, you know, it's taking a G chord, right? The G chord as we know it, or you might know it like this, or like this, same chord, right? Same notes, just different configuration of your fingers. But we're taking it to its movable shape and moving it up like a conveyor belt right here to find C. So this is a C chord using the G shape. And what's after G in 𝘥? E, right? So the next being the E chord shape. So when we have G right here, the G chord shape for C, then we're going to pick up where it left off, finding the E chord shape, which is here, right? Remember E chord shape, moved up here. And bam, right there. That's where it starts, right? That also happens to be where the C minor pentatonic is. Right? It's in that position. So I wanted to keep it nice and simple and just in the same neighborhood. So we have that. Now we have F, the 4 chord. How do we find that using 𝘥? Well, let's think. The earliest, you know, so to speak, F we can play on the fretboard is here. Right? That F bar chord, which is actually an E shape, right? So that's E in 𝘥. What's after E? D, right? So then we have to find F, but in the D chord shape, looks like this. Okay, and here's the thing. The word 𝘥 is a revolving door. So once we reach D at the end, we're not done, right? There's more. So the more is just, it's starting over. So we start with the E chord shape, and then we have the D chord shape. Then, you know, if we're starting over, we start over with C. So there's the C chord shape. And then here's the A chord shape, right? C, A. And there we go. That's where we land, right? Right there, right in that chunk, right? Where the 1 chord was. And there's the 4 chord right on top of it. That's why a lot of songs, if you play the 4 chord, or sorry, the 1 chord with, you know, in the, let's say this particular shape, right? Very common bar chord shape. You're going to find the 4 chord immediately beneath it, right? Using the A chord shape. Like so many songs. Right, you can find that, you know, any key, it doesn't matter, right? You can find that positioning there. So that's where we found the 4 chord. Now the 5 chord, right? Remember I said I used the C chord shape for that 5 chord, but the 5 chord is G, right? The actual tonality of it is G. So the earliest G we can play on the fretboard is the G chord shape, right? So let's think of G where it is in 𝘥. What comes after G? E, right? So that would be, there's E, and what comes after E in 𝘥? D. So then we take that D chord shape. And again, I go more in depth on this in that previous lesson. I'm just kind of, you know, showing you quickly through it. So after D, 𝘥 starts over. So then we have C. And bingo, that's where we land. That's right in the neighborhood of the 1 chord and the 4 chord. So I wanted to take those particular chord shapes over each chord and craft this solo. Hence how I used 𝘥 to create an epic guitar solo, right? So I really just wanted to show you every little piece of how I came to that conclusion. And of course, with a couple extra notes added for color and some similar, you know, minor pentatonic sensibilities, it passes off as a pretty cool solo. And now that you know this solo, you still have only barely scratched the surface of how many brilliant musical ideas you can come up with by using the 𝘥 system and just understanding how the fretboard works like a conveyor belt. So remember that free gift I was telling you about? This is it right here. This is a free system called the Fretboard Conveyor Belt that's going to show you exactly that. How to navigate the entire fretboard and playing in any key by using this conveyor belt method. So be sure to click here to claim your copy or check the link in the description box. I want to thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm Eddie with Guitar Mastery Method, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.